David, as Alicia was saying, we've had a big pullback in the equity markets over the past couple of weeks. We've got commodity prices retracing, but the rand continuing to prove resilient against the dollar, and that's despite the euro trading at 6.5-month lows against the greenback. What do you make of the rand at the moment?
Stephen, absolutely. That's the big surprise, the rand's resilience against almost all the currencies globally. The rand has held on very, very well, and the only attraction that I can see at the moment is the yield play. But even that, given the state of nervousness that exists in all asset classes at this point in time, I'd be very surprised if that was the case, that people were piling onto the carry trade here and adding more risk in an environment that is shaky at best.
Of course, news out this morning that China might start to raise interest rates pretty soon, as soon as inflation gets to that 2.5% level, because there is a concern about Chinese inflation going forward, and also about asset bubbles forming in that economy. Is that adding a bit to the volatility we're seeing in markets?
I think so, Stephen, particularly in the commodity sector. China has been the driver over the last year, or in fact, depending on which picture you look at, they've been the driver for the last 30 years. There's now question marks about how China is going to play itself out. Is there credit bubble blooming there? How far do the authorities tighten credit? And that's creating some concern, because any slowdown in China will definitely have an effect on the rest of the world.
Just looking at the euro, it went below 139 against the dollar, 138.80 just a short while ago. I mean, do you think the euro's weakness has been overdone, considering the European Union said it would provide emergency funding to Greece if necessary?
Yeah, Stephen, it's a very difficult question to answer. I'm a perennial dollar bear, but having looked at the picture over the last few months, one of the factors obviously is that, as we saw on Friday, US growth is outstripping European growth. There are some huge fiscal question marks within Europe, notably around Greece and Ireland and Spain and so on and so forth. And many will say, well, that's the periphery of Europe, but the fact is that those are European nations within the EU mechanism, and it's going to have an impact. So very difficult to say whether the weakness has been overdone. If one isolates Greece and says it's a Greek problem, then certainly it looks overdone, simply because Greece, as a percentage of the European economy, is around about 3%. But if it does spread and there's question marks raised about other nations within the EU mechanism, then certainly the euro has still some room to go.
Well, just looking at those US growth figures on Friday, 5.7% growth, significantly higher than the 4.7% the market was looking for, but really coming off a very, very low base from December 2008, and it's unlikely that sort of growth is going to continue into this year, isn't it?
I think so, Stephen. It's not surprising that growth has come on the back of such large stimulus that we've seen in the economy, and as you point out, rightly so, of a very low base. The point is that even with the very, very high growth that we're seeing, it's not adding to any job creation, and that's the big concern. Jobless recovery will simply mean that we're going to head into a double dip situation sometime in the future, and that's what markets are concerned about now. And until we see some jobs recovery, it's very difficult to see those numbers being sustained at all.
Of course, we had trade figures out in South Africa on Friday, 3.7 billion rand surplus for December, and that followed a 2.5 billion rand deficit in November, much higher than expected. How do you think the rand at the moment is playing out between importers and exporters?
Well, I must say, Stephen, the start of the year 2010 has been very, very quiet, extremely so. It's very difficult to gauge any sort of momentum between exporters and importers on the kind of business we've seen, because things have been very, very quiet on the domestic front. Having said that, it does appear that the exporters that have held onto their proceeds are a little bit more concerned about the fact that the rand is not weakening, and in fact are coming in to sell some of those proceeds. But looking back, trade numbers are a little bit fickle. We have seen an improvement on that front over the last year or so, and as the global economy picks up and feeds through into South Africa, I think we'll see a resumption of the trade deficit going forward, and that will obviously add to the current account burden. But for the moment, things are really, really quiet on that front.
Of course, we had those PMI numbers out just a short while ago. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them. Our PMI 53.6 for January, 52.5 in December. So it looks like the manufacturing sector is starting to gain some traction in South Africa.
I think that is good news, and you know, I kind of, the way I'm reading it, Stephen, is a bit like the US GDP. You know, of a very low base, and of the global recovery, it would have been an absolute disaster if we didn't see some improvement over there. But also, you know, that positive sentiment needs to feed through into job creation, particularly here in South Africa, as the trade unions are getting a little bit more vociferous around their demands.
David, your outlook for the rand going forward in the short term, just given the fact that China might start to tighten monetary policy?
Stephen, I'm a little bit concerned. As I said, most of us are a bit, rather concerned, confused as to the strength of the rand. And I think if we do see the dollar resume its upward march, then I think the rand can come under some pressure. Certainly 765 now is a technical level on the top side to break through. And if we get through that, we're heading towards 775 or around about 780. For the moment, on the downside, I think 750 is a very good support level. And, you know, that's the current range. But I'm a little bit concerned, a little bit nervous, and I think we could see some momentum building toward the weak side as the week progresses.
And do you think when that price action comes in that it will be swift for the rand?
Yeah, I think depending on what's happening in other markets, it may be rather swift because the rand is lagging and certainly been, in our opinion, a little bit too strong over the last little while. So should we see a correction, it should be rather swift.